Welcome to the Building Your Career podcast. I'm your host, Dom Taujanskas, and join us as we explore the world of construction. Each episode, we welcome a guest that shares career highlights and career advice, and hopefully inspires the next generation of construction professionals. Welcome to another edition of the Building Your Career podcast. Today, I'm very excited to have Ed Osman Jones, the director of Ardor Projects, who, when I was speaking to him on the phone, had quite an interesting background, a very varied background as well in terms of sectors, but was very keen to get him on the Guest as a Pod. So if we could focus on the current, Ed, could you tell us a little bit more about your current job role and also the company that you work for as well?
Yeah, hi Dom. So as per our sort of previous chat, I recently ended employment with a previous company, um, which was fine, and started up on my own, which is now the second time I've had my own construction company in the last 10 years. Um, we've we've started sort of quite luckily with a project sort of up and running. So previous company actually couldn't complete the project, so their employment was or their contract was terminated. And then my new company, along with my business partner, took that contract on, and we've been running that one for the last 4 months. Um, We've got a second contract in central London, in Notting Hill, just off Portobello Road, which is slightly less sort of construction, more kind of interior design. There's a little bit of work, but nothing too major. Um, and yeah, so I mean, we're pretty young, pretty hungry. Um, we're tendering on a few other projects in and around the sort of London area.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the architects that we're currently working for are reasonably impressed, I think, I hope. And so, keeping relationships going there will hopefully lead to other openings and being able to tender on future projects and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, the project that we're running in South East London is reasonably big. It's sort of just under the £1 million mark. Full house refurb with extensions, studio, big landscaping projects. Although we're not really involved, that's contracted to somebody else. But there's quite a lot going on, and it's a eco retrofit. So trying to get it as close to a Passivhaus status as possible.
Wow.
Which is pretty technical when you're dealing with 120-year-old building, trying to get it tight and uh, getting it running as efficiently as possible has its challenges, but it's good fun. It's good fun.
That's pretty cool. And we've had quite a few sustainability people on this podcast before. And
Yeah,
just to kind of touch
the
on
way it's
that point.
going.
Yeah, definitely. Most definitely. And how have you found it? Because we've had a few guests here who've had set up their own companies a while back. We've had a few guests who are quite new to the game as well. So how have you kind of personally found that transition from setting up your own company then?
I mean, I'm fortunate in that I've had a business before. So I started a business after I worked in the oil industry, as I was telling you before, some time ago. In 2014, there's a big crash in oil price, and companies globally all went under, including the company that I worked for, was a Canadian outfit. Um, and so similarly, I was kind of blessed with the project. I sort of walked into a project and had to set my own business up. So that's what I did. So I've kind of, I've done it once already, which is really helpful. And it certainly streamlines the second time round. But it's a pretty daunting challenge. There's people sort of, I don't know, look at it with slightly rose-tinted glasses maybe, and that it's lots more money and and lots less stress, or I don't know, whatever, however they want to view it. The reality is that it's pretty tough, and there's a lot of running a business that you might not appreciate. From the accounting, marketing, paying people's taxes, and dealing with employees, and then there's the building side of it, and the winning contracts, and managing, yeah, clients and architects and everything else. It's pretty tough, but but we've done pretty well in the 4 months that we've been open. So onwards and upwards, and hopefully we can keep going on the same sort of trend.
Oh, most definitely. And yeah, I think, what a lot of people think is, I can be my own boss, but it's not really the way it works. It's not a case of it, it is very hard to set up on your own, especially when you're kind of first starting out. So there's a lot of hard work and effort that does need to be put in to kind of maintain a business. But you kind of mentioned it a little bit there in terms of your background and experience. So if we could take you back to the very start of your career then. How did you first get started in construction, and what's been your kind of career path to date then?
Yeah, so I started at kind of 15, I guess, when I started washing trucks in the local builders merchant, and then took on some sort of Saturday work and things like that in and around the shop. And so yeah, so I mean, essentially, I guess you could say I started from a pretty young age. I then went into college and did welding and fabrication,
Mm-hmm.
and then went out and did sort of site welding, and smaller structural stuff, including sort of gates and railings and bits and pieces like that. Which I guess that, although it's not necessarily construction based, or quite a lot of it wasn't, it has employs a lot of the same techniques that we use on site. Carpentry, for instance, very very similar. Um, so I did that for about 3 or 4 years. Went off and did a trip around the world, and then came back and got into groundworks. So that was probably about 22, and I was in groundworks for about 5 years. So the groundworks kind of included everything from fairly big civil engineering projects.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the bigger ones, um, I think it's Alexandria Hospital down in Portsmouth. There are some schools, one over towards Brighton. We did the port at Southampton. They were having quite a big expansion, and so we did
Oh, wow.
23 acres of concreting down there, which is
Wow.
pretty vast amount of concrete. So that was quite good fun. Uh, Very cold in the winter, but
I
generally
can
quite
imagine.
good. Yeah. Um, and yeah, I kind of grew through the ranks, I guess. Ended up driving machines and running gangs and things like that. And then I got an opening up into the oil industry, for a seismic surveying company. So essentially, they're exploring vast areas of land for. They're looking at the underlying geology
Mm-hmm.
using um, using geotechnical, um, seismic equipment. They're kind of mapping the underlying geology and looking for hydrocarbons, oil, gas, minerals, water, salts, everything. So I worked for them, and I was part of the management team there, which kind of really got me into the operation side of things, the management side of things, and really sort of honed my computer skills, my ability to deal and negotiate and manage people and relationships and everything else. And so I was with them for um, 2010 to 2014, 15, and
Mm-hmm.
I'd done bits and pieces in between, some fun boat projects out in Germany and things like that. So, um, I sort of jumped in and out of it over the years. Um, and then yeah, when that all came to a bit of a crashing end, it was that was a good fun job all over Europe, big boy equipment, drilling holes, setting off dynamite, things like that. So that was quite entertaining. Um, yeah, when that came to a bit of a halt, I was a bit stuck, and yeah, luckily it was a contact that got me back into the construction, in the management side of things, and then yeah, I ran my own business, like I said, for a little while, it went really well, but it being sort of thrust back into construction in central London without building a network of people around me, it was very, very tough to sustain that. Um, I didn't have a network of architects, for instance, which I think is, depending on how you want to set yourself up, is fundamental for where we are at the moment, anyway. Um, so yeah, I decided to fold that company after about 2.5 years of running it. Like I say, it was successful for 2.5 years, but it just wasn't. It was too stressful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I went into into project management and constructing. And I've done 3 years in total with 2 different companies, which was good. It's taught me a lot. Um, it's allowed me to build a really good network of people and experience, which is pretty critical. Um, Unfortunately, both of those companies no longer trade,
Mm-hmm.
so that's a bit of a shame. But also, it's, valuable information for me to take forwards into the new venture, because
Definitely.
they've both folded for very similar reasons, and
Okay.
a little bit of bad luck, and you can't odds that as inflation rises and material rises, and COVID as well has been a pretty tough couple of years. But the flip side of that was that essentially they didn't manage their own finances particularly well, and I think that's
Yeah.
quite a big part of it. So yeah,
And
so that gets us up to just before we started Ardor Projects.
okay, brilliant. Well, that's a really kind of varied background. And I think um, I just wanted to touch on a point that you mentioned there for some of our younger
Mm,
listeners who have kind of messaged in and were unsure about kind of job titles, because a lot of our younger listeners are very ambitious. They want to climb up the ladder. They want to know what options are available to them.
mm.
Could you just kind of explain, maybe in a nutshell, what the operations side of the career progressions, such as an operations director, an operations manager, what that kind of entails, and how that's different to other job roles within the same business?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I've kind of found my preferred part of the industry, I guess. So
Yeah.
project management is much more about managing people and relationships, and I mean, we're talking at the lower end of the construction industry where we are. Certainly, when you get up to the bigger boys, this role becomes probably quite different from how I'm describing it. But
Mm-hmm.
um, so yeah, I mean, project management is about being sort of friendly face on the ground between the clients and architects and everything else, and keeping things running, making sure the subcontractors are happy, and generally they're on program, and they might look at some of the financial side of things. Whereas I think the operation side of it is a little bit of the next sort of, not necessarily step up, but step back, and you're looking across a wider picture. So some of the pre-planning stuff, making sure as we go into contracts and things that we have all the resources and people and everything else in place before we get onto the ground. Um, and so it's kind of slightly more behind the scenes, I guess, than project management. And that's where I've found that I fit in, and I prefer to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's great being out there and chatting and being a friendly face and everything else, but I also quite like to dig a little bit deeper, and also sometimes be a little bit further back from that position sometimes. Um, but I don't think it's people talk about project management is the one that kind of comes up, and is
Yeah.
is you can go to uni, or you can go to college, or you can do an MVQ or whatever in project management, whereas operations is a little bit harder, I think. But good fun, and depending on what you like and where you think your skill set is, it's pretty good place to be, I'd say.
And it's really good and really refreshing to hear from yourself that there is those different options available, because that's one of the things that people starting out might not necessarily know, is that there are different, and you've found your niche. And I
Mm,
think one of the bits of advice is that at the start of your career, just explore different avenues and find your niche, which obviously you
mm,
have. And I think that
yeah.
leads very nicely on to our next question. If you could, are you a job seeker tired of endlessly scrolling through job boards with no success? Has your job search hit a dead end? Well, we're here to tell you there's another way. Here at Quest Personnel, we offer a variety of free resources to help job seekers just like you. Our team of expert recruiters is here to help you through every step of the job search process, from CV writing to interview techniques. But that's not all. We also offer exclusive access to workshops, networking events, and other job roles that you simply won't find anywhere else. So what are you waiting for? Get in touch now on our website, questpersonnel.co.uk. If you could kind of turn back the hands of time then and speak to your younger self, and just give yourself one bit of advice, what advice would that be? And I might extend this actually as well to if you could turn back to when you also set up your first business. What advice would you give in terms of being a business owner as well? So I'll kind of do two questions in one there, really.
You might need to repeat the second part of
Yeah,
that.
yeah. That's fine.
So yeah, going back to have a chat with my former self or younger self, I think one thing that I've done. So firstly, I'm not sort of formally educated,
Mhm.
and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but I am now trying to get sort of certification behind my ability. So I'm doing an MVQ in operations management, and that will then lead on to my chartership within the uh, CIOB, and I can't think of what the acronym means now. Chartered Institute Building.
Yeah.
So that's quite a good title, and it's kind of that alongside my NEBOSH health and safety kind of gives me some accreditation behind my 20 years experience, which I
Hmm.
think is quite critical when you start wanting to climb the ladder.
Yep.
And if Ardor Projects collapses for whatever reason, then I'll be in a fairly good position then to go into a bigger organisation if I don't start again. Anyway, back to the question, I guess. One thing I did was jumped around a lot between different industries and vocations. And I think the reality is, and I've got friends who started in the groundwork side of things when I did, and they've now got really quite established companies.
Hmm.
Um, so I think there's a lot to be said for picking a trade,
Hmm.
sticking with that trade, mastering the trade, and then by the time you get to our age, the sort of late 30s, early 40s, actually that trade's going to pay you dividends,
Hmm.
and you're going to be very good at it, and you'll be able to command, quite good salary and good prices and set up on your own and everything else. And if you're a bit
Hmm.
business savvy, then there's no reason why you can't do well out of that trade. Um, I think, yeah, I probably spent too much time sort of bouncing around a little bit, never really mastered one.
Yeah.
Um, and it was only the fact that I ended up in management that actually that's become my trade now.
Hmm.
Um, I'm hand up tools, but I'm not a master carpenter, I'm not a joiner, I'm not a bricklayer or whatever.
Hmm.
So I think, and actually I was talking to a young chap earlier who's doing some roofing for us at the moment. And he said, "Oh, he's been offered a job doing some forklift driving." And I immediately said, "Well, great, but you're going to earn more money being a roofer than you are being a forklift driver."
Hmm.
Um, maybe he wants to be a forklift driver. Maybe that's what he's always wanted to do, and that's fine, great. But if you want to make money, then stick at roofing. Become really good at it. Start a business. You do well. Um, so I think that's quite a valuable bit of advice. And then if you do want to carry on climbing the ladder and become part of the management team, then yeah, you do have to be pretty good with emails and software and Excel, and you will have to do a bit in the finance side of things and a lot of communication, and that communication has to be pretty good. And you have to be able to manage different people. I mean, that's what it's about. You get to the management side of it. It's yeah, not just making sure everything runs on time, but it's making sure that people are happy with what's happening. So it's a bit of a different beast when you get up to that sort of management side of it. And what was the second part of the question?
So the second part of the question is because I was quite interested in, as someone who's kind of ran their own business, what advice would you give to yourself when you were just starting out your first business and setting that up? Knowing everything that you know now about the
Mm.
hardships of setting up and going out alone. So what one piece of advice would you give yourself when you were just starting out in terms of your own business?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem with the situation that I had when I started up the first time was I set the business up because I had a job already won, essentially.
Hmm.
So it was a colleague who said, you're out of work, come and do this project for us, but you need to set up a business for it. The reality is that I didn't have a network. The project went really well, um, but I didn't have a network around me of engineers, architects, bricklayers, roofers, everything else, which to be able to go forward. And the bit that I'm not so good at is the sort of sales side of things. It's not. I'm not just not. It's not me really being out there. selling all day long is not what I enjoy doing. So marketing the business was very difficult for me, and then not having a network of people that I could go to, um, yeah, to advertise myself or to even discuss getting on tenders meant that it was really difficult. So it was kind of a flawed enterprise from the outset, I think.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think going back to the bit of advice, I think you need to grow organically. So either
Yeah.
work for people or start off maybe as a single trade, a bricklayer or whatever, and then start meeting the right people, start networking is pretty critical.
Okay.
I've been in the industry in central London now for 5 years, and I've got a fairly good handle on, the local architects and what's going on, and that is very, very valuable now, and that's what I didn't have then. So I think it's
Solid advice, really solid advice. um, so, just in your kind of opinion, then, what are the kind of different career paths available to be able to enter into the construction industry? Either going down the degree and university route or the trades route. Is there any options for people who, for whatever reason, just can't go to university? So, what's the different career paths available from your perspective?
Yeah, well, I mean, both myself and my business partner are kind of not formally educated, and I've worked with project managers who've gone through the university and come out as project managers, and they've been excellent. And I think certainly from the you know traditional project management stance, and if you're doing it by the book, then those guys are going to be better than anyone else. I think what they would lack is the technical ability on site.
Hmm.
um, it's always quite difficult to gain respect from the workers on site if they think that you can't do what they're doing. So I think one of the advantages that I've got is that I can pick up a lump of timber and turn it into a door frame, or I can put a stud wall up, or it can become a roof. It might not be done that quite so quickly, but it will be a roof eventually. Um, so I think you know that's the downside with going down that sort of formal education route, is that you lack some technical ability sometimes. But then equally, if you come up through the trade route, which is the way I've come, you might struggle with some of the communication or computer literacy or whatever it is, that side of it. So I think there's advantages and disadvantages for both. Um, I think I fit quite nicely into that sort of middle ground bracket where I am pretty good at communication, and my computer skills are reasonably okay. Um, so that's why I found a bit of a niche, and like I say, I can muck in with the guys on site. I spent all Friday tidying my own building site, which the guys on site are wondering what the hell's going on, but the labourer's on holiday and someone's got to do it, so I'm getting in there. So yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a right and wrong way to do it. I think there's plenty of people that I know have started as um, yeah, carpenter improvers or junior electricians, whatever, and they've now got their own businesses and they're now doing very well. Um, if you wanted to start your own construction company, you've got to get in there and get on the tools, as far as I'm concerned, because you have to know what you're talking about when you start building for yourself. If you want to only go into management, then yeah, you probably need to get formal vocation in some sort of formal management, really. Um, but then I think you miss out on some of the good fun stuff on site as well. But it's not for everyone. So yeah, I don't think there's a right and a wrong way, really. It's a bit of a messy old job, but it's quite good fun.
Yeah, and that's kind of similar to my kind of experience within the industry, because I did 5 years at university studying architecture, and
Yeah.
the only way I actually learned anything technical was to go out on site, and just like my weekends were spent on site building a huge school in the local area. And I learned more on site at the weekends than I ever did sat in a classroom just learning, kind of what they were teaching me. So I think you are completely right there. And with the subcontractors and the trades on site, it goes down to that respect thing as well. If they know that, you've been there and done that and been in their shoes, you've got much more of a better relationship and much more of a kind of a respect from them if you can demonstrate that you've been there and done that. So I completely agree with what you're saying there. But just to kind of lead on to our final question as well, with the CIOB, as you mentioned, producing a report recently saying we need 250,000 more people in the UK construction industry by 2027. What can the industry do to attract the youngsters into the industry, but not only that, to make sure that they're trained well, to make sure that they're nurtured well, and to make sure that they stay in the industry as well? What can the industry do better than it is doing now?
Yeah, I mean, I had a quick ponder before we sat down about this because, in all honesty, I'm not quite sure. I think it's a really, really tough question, and I think the kind of Instagram generation, slightly, I'm not wanting to sound like a senile old man, but you know, it's a difficult one because it is a dirty job. It is pretty rough. You are going to get messy and smelly and covered in dust and everything else. But it can be quite lucrative. You can make quite a lot of money. If you go in through the management route, then again you can do the same. It can be a very rewarding industry to be in. For the younger generation, I think a lot of them don't really want to get their hands dirty. They don't want to come home from work with grubby fingernails and things like that. It's a bit of a shame because I've had been in some wonderful situations in various trades over the years. But equally, I've been in some pretty horrible ones as well. Freezing your proverbials off in the middle of winter, stuck on a track, digging trenches, and not great fun. But looking back on it, it was quite good fun. I think it's a really difficult place that the industry's in, and obviously we've had a lot of assistance from our European friends, and the majority of my workforce is Eastern European, and most of them are really good, solid workers. So we need to keep those guys over here and entertained and happy. That's pretty critical. But yeah, we need to bring our youngsters into the industry. I don't know. I don't know how to make it more attractive. It's very difficult, I think, given that the sort of luxurious lifestyle that is portrayed on things like Instagram. People just aren't interested. So yeah, I can't help you with that one, I'm afraid.
Well, that's what we're trying to do here, is just get the word out there, talk to people about the different career paths available. I was only at an event last year, the Youth Build UK Awards, where there was various charities, and I heard a lot of stories about, the kind of the younger generation coming through as either bricklayers or carpenters, which really gave me a little bit of faith back in the industry. But, what we're trying to do is just spread the message, get the word out there, and let people know what the different career paths are available. But, as you said yourself, you've come through from a lot of different things. You've done a lot of different things in your past before, and now you're the owner of your own business. So definitely a success story that you've had there in your career. So Ed, thank you very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you, and I was really keen to kind of get you on as a guest. But it's been an absolute pleasure on this podcast.
Thanks very much for your time, and hopefully you'll have my business partner on at some point if he can give you
definitely
different view on it all.
Well, hopefully she won't speak ill of you at all, but I can edit that bit out if she does.
If she does.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Ed. Take care.
Cheers, Dom.
Us on the Building Your Career podcast. We hope you enjoyed hearing from our guest and learning about the different career paths available. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe so we can reach even more listeners. And if anyone wants any free CV advice or simply wants to know the options available to them, don't hesitate to get in touch.